swindle that is also known as Budget 2010. It's a great tax swindle because it is the budget that has taken money out of the pockets of many and given it to the few. It's given it to the people who don't actually need money. And let me tell you about friends of mine from up in Kaitaia who earn together $60,000 combined income. She earns $25,000, he earns $35,000. Mr. Speaker, they pulled out the calculator and did the sums, and after they'd finished their sums, they realised they're going to be $11 worse off. $11 worse off. They were promised they're going to be better off after this budget, but they're going to be $11 worse off a week. Compare that to the tax cuts afforded to the head of Telecom, who used to get $60,000 a week after tax. $60,000 a week after tax. My friends get $60,000 a year before tax. The head of Telecom gets $4,500 a week more in his pocket. I asked the House, I asked New Zealand, what can he do with $65,000 a week that he couldn't do with $60,000? And my friends are told not to be envious. You know, my friends work really hard. They put in as many hours as the head of Telecom a week, and they're told, don't be envious of somebody who gets an extra $5,000 a week in their back pocket when they get $11 less a week. But, Mr. Speaker, I really want to talk about education and the broken promises afforded to the education system. What is it that National doesn't understand about education? They just don't get it. They don't get, in order to improve the outcomes and the achievement of kids in New Zealand, we need to invest in education, not cut education. Now, it's ironic that some 3-4 weeks ago, we were in this House debating the Education Amendment Bill, where there was a part in the bill that introduced information matching between the New Zealand Teachers' Council and the Ministry of Education to identify individuals teaching in schools without registration. And I agreed with that because every teacher in every school should be registered. 5 minutes later, when the budget comes out, or the great tax swindle, when that comes out, we find that in early childhood centres, we only need to have 80% of teachers fully registered. And I wonder why it is there's an anomaly between, we say that it's really important that those in schools need to be 100% registered, and yet in early childhood centres we only need 80% of the staff registered there. But let me tell you about Ruawai Kindergarten. Ruawai Kindergarten, I visited them probably 3 weeks ago, and they told me, and I didn't make these figures up, they told me that after that decision to they only need to have 80% of their staff registered, they are going to lose $46,000 every year. $46,000. Now, this isn't me making these figures up. This is what Ruawai Kindergarten, the head of Ruawai Kindergarten, told me. It's amazing that over here in the Grand Hall, we had a meeting. Sorry, we had a situation where we honoured all the excellent teachers.
Sorry, two members said tell the truth. You cannot say that's unparliamentary language.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It wasn't long ago that we had over here in the Grand Hall, we honoured all the excellent teachers, and it was actually the head teacher from Ruawai Kindergarten received an award for being an excellent teacher, and she was recognised for the great work she's been doing up in Ruawai. Sitting there, she said, I wonder what's going to happen in the budget, because the budget was that very afternoon. They had $46,000 ripped out of their annual budget. So how is that money going to be made up? That money is going to be made up by charging parents. Ruawai Kindergarten only has 22 kids on its books. That's how many that they can enrol at any one time. They have 40 on the waiting list. 22 kids. Those 22 families are going to be charged to send their kids to Ruawai Kindergarten. They're the only kindergarten around for about 20 kilometres. If those parents cannot afford the charge, 46,000 divided by 22 families. If the parents cannot afford to make up that money, they either have to go 20-odd kilometres away, which they probably can't afford to do, or they're going to have to just not send their kids to early childhood education in rural Wai. And that is a crying shame. Because what we're doing here is that we're just re-emphasising and reinforcing that whole fact that low and middle income people who can't afford education won't be educated, and it's just reinforcing that whole wheel, that whole cycle of underachievement, and that is the fault of this government. It was interesting to hear David Bennett over there saying that they're listening to the sector. Listening to the sector, they're happy they've got 4%, a 4% increase in their operational grants. This is schools I'm talking about. Well, if you'd really listened to the sector, they would have got 5.9% increase in the operation grant, because that is how much inflation is going up by. And in fact, a 4% increase in the operation grant and a 5.9% increase in inflation is actually a 2% loss. It's about time that the national government actually got their heads around education. The only person who's got any experience in education is actually Alan Peachy, who's so far out of sorts that he's actually sitting around on this side of the house and amongst us. He's the only person in the national government that's got any idea about education whatsoever. Then we have the sad story about the wharekura. Now, Anne Tolley said in this house that she was really rapt that wharekura, the wharekura were really happy about the amount of funding they've got, but that's because they don't actually know how much they're missing out from. Because if they, under the Labour government, the kura from Taumarere, my own patch in Moirua, where I grew up, would receive $451,000 under the Labour government. Unfortunately, they receive almost half of that. Te wharekura, of Whangaroa would have received $234,000, but instead gets $140,000. This is the government's investment in Māori education. Te wharekura o te tonga o Hokianga should receive $324,000, but instead gets $218,000. I ask, how could the Minister of Māori Affairs, who is also the Associate Minister of Education, how could he allow this to happen? What is it that he doesn't like about Māori education? Why is it that he's prepared to support the national government who is underfunding Māori education to such a horrific extent? It is wrong, and both the Minister of Māori Affairs, the Associate Minister of Education, and the Minister Anne Tolley need to be hauled over the coals or held to account by Māori educators throughout New Zealand. Professional development, if we're going to raise achievement, professional development is what we need to invest in. We need to make sure that our teachers are the most skilled. Every child in every class in every school or early childhood centre has the right to an excellent teacher, and it's up to the government, it's the government's responsibility to create the conditions where excellent teachers can weave their magic, and those excellent conditions can only be attained by giving them the right training and the right professional development. But what do we see? We see cuts to professional development. We see professional development on the implementation of national standards. But let me tell you now, national standards are about reporting achievement. They're not about teaching. So here's reporting over here. It's not teaching. Teaching is over here, and it's when teachers, it's the interaction between teachers and students, that's where learning occurs. And that's where the investment needs to be made, not in just not just in professional development on how to implement national standards, because national standards on their own aren't going to raise achievement. In fact, if they're implemented wrong, and I believe that they are being implemented wrong, they're actually going to have a detrimental effect on achievement in New Zealand. Mr Speaker, I met with wharekura the other day, and they're concerned about ngā whanaketanga, which are the Māori national standards. They don't feel that they've had enough time to implement them properly. They're only halfway through the trial year, and that's fair enough. They're still having the trial year, except mainstream schools also deserve that trial year, Mr Speaker. It's not fair. I believe that this budget is a tax swindle. It's a budget of broken promises. It's
Sorry
a
to interrupt
budget
the honourable
for
member.
the
His
few,
time has
not the many.